final episode of the year, but we have a very special treat. We have Dr. Brian Licuanan here with us at the Legacy Project. I'm Albert, and this is my dad, Albert Chavez. And just a little bit about Brian. He has a very special and interesting story that we want to dive on today. He is the author of How to Get Your Resistant Loved One into Treatment, and he has shared a little bit of insight about what that means, and he is also a psychologist as well. And so we just wanted to deep dive into how he got into the man that he is today and share a little bit about his family life as well. So without further ado, Dr. Brian Licuanan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here on a Tuesday evening. Thank you both.
Yeah, man. So a little background. So what intrigued me about you, Brian, is, when we talked last week is, you're a father, you've been married a long time, but before we get into that, relationship-wise, you've had success in life in general. And so one of the reasons why Albert and I created this project is we wanted to share, information, knowledge, what is it to be a man, masculinity, and just different ideas. But really what intrigued me was how you got into the field that you got into and why. Would you mind giving us a little bit of background, and then we can kind of stem some questions from that? Oh, volume. Your volume's not on.
Are you muted?
Unmute yourself. Are you muted?
Hold on.
There you go. You're good.
Perfect.
You're good.
Okay, got it?
Yep.
Okay. For all your listeners out there, this is my second Instagram Live. So
Great.
All good.
my first one was a little bit glitchy as well. So thank you. So
Yeah.
back to everyone. Yeah, thank you for having me on this Tuesday evening. And your question is a very, very good one, and actually a very common one that I come across. But it wasn't something that I do write about in my book early on. It was not a straight path. For much of my 20s, I was actually quite confused on where my direction in life was. I was in undergraduate school for almost 7 years. I was entertaining the thought of entering law enforcement, and I actually was also entertaining the idea of going down the medical school route. So I took those classes and actually took the medical college admission test, otherwise known as the MCAT. And then I was doing clinical work to some degree during that period of time, working with severely emotionally and physically abused adolescents. And so I was getting some feet wet there, but had no idea that may turn into a pathway to a career. And so when I graduated from college, I entered a PhD program in a field of psychology called industrial organizational psychology, which is quite different branch of psychology. It doesn't have anything to do with clinical and therapy. These are your behavioral consultants in the workplace. These are your human resource directors. These are people who design instruments to assess appropriate employees, to helping establish a effective culture in the workplace and data analysis. And I realized in that program, a PhD program, that this was not something that was a good fit for me. And I was then again lost and indecisive, and the clinical program was in that same university, and it really came to light because I did have people tell me in the past that I would be a good clinician, and it finally dawned on me that I need to make this transition, and so I did, and haven't looked back since. And so that was sort of a little bit of a summary of not a straight path, but how I eventually found what I believe I should be doing.
Yeah, it's super powerful. I think you're not the only one, too, that was lost in their 20s. I feel like a lot of us, even myself, at times, I felt like that was huge. And especially as everyone's pushing, like they're waiting until marriage a little bit longer. It seems like it's going to be the trend at this point in time, too. So it's definitely cool watching like how you just simplified your life story, even though obviously there's a lot of adversity that you had to go through in there as well. And that's part of the reason why we like to do this. There's a lot of times when we want to just promote our successes, right? But we want to figure out and share, like, how did you become this person as well? Because it's it's really beneficial for young men like me who can really just put our head down and want to get to work, right? Yeah, there's a lot of decisions that go into what makes a career, and like why would I want to go down that, and along with me wanting to have children down the line too. So I guess more specifically with how it relates to your life, um, when you said you were looking at going to do the MCAT, right? And like being a police officer, when did you finally decide like this is going to be the field for me? And like, was there something that happened in your life specifically that changed that decision?
Well, for me, it was a crossroads of a deep exploration, and so I had to do some type of deep assessment when I was in that place in that initial graduate PhD program that I can't do this. This is, if I enter this field, I will probably most likely burn out because it was just so not in line with my skill set. And I just had some mispreconceived ideas of what that field would entail. And it was just this really moment that I had to do a deep search. I looked at, what do I want in life? What are my intentions and my goals? What are my values especially? And what am I good at? What are my skills? And one thing that I did realize is that I am pretty good at listening, and I'm pretty good at reading people's energies as well. I just was kind of sensitive to that on some level, and sort of finding ways to communicate empathically. And so it finally materialized. And like I said before, there were people that had told me in my college years that, hey, I could picture you as being a clinician or a psychologist. And, you just took that with a grain of salt, especially when you have a different path intended. And it finally came to a head during that moment where I really was stuck and had to decide and put all that information together. And it really dawned on me that, and I don't know to what materialized for that, but it kind of hit me that I think that's where I need to go. And like I said, once I did it, I felt at home. I felt this is in line with my skills, abilities, values, preferences. And like I said, it just was full speed ahead since then.
So going on the rabbit hole, so explain something to the audience that aren't familiar with you. Like, what type of clinician are you, and what are you known for?
Sure. So I'm a licensed psychologist here in California. I have what we call a PhD, and I got my degree in more of a general counseling psychology. And then from there, I did an internship, and I do have a specialization in insomnia. Worked a lot with substance use disorder for almost 15 years at a treatment facility. And now I am carving out a niche for myself as a family crisis strategist, helping families who are really stuck and feel helpless and hopeless because they have a loved one who doesn't think they need help or are refusing to get help. And so that is, in addition to the work that I do, I've also been involved in various support organizations. NAMI, which is the National Alliance of Mental Illness, is one of them. And a lot of what I found myself doing was a crisis intervention for families who were desperate. Our loved one might harm themselves, hurt others, or put themselves in a bad situation. So I found myself really, really intervening and providing the family some really guidance. And so there's a huge need for that, and hence that's where a lot of my work has been directed to is coming up with solutions for families to still provide love and care for their struggling loved one, but also to set some healthy limits and boundaries to set them to a place where they can hopefully accept help.
Yeah, it's so when you do work with these families, what do you notice is like pretty common, like that's happening right now? Like what is like probably the top one or two or three most common things that you notice with families and how they actually learn to set these boundaries with each other in this complex system?
Well, great question. And one thing that is very pervasive is that substance addiction, substance use disorders, and mental health are almost all-time highs. we saw a lot since the pandemic, heightened levels of substance use disorder and heightened mental health acuities, whether depression and anxiety, even suicidality. And so we are seeing a huge spike in those arenas. And on the family level, what I see a lot is of why family members feel stuck and they can't get help is they harbor a great deal of guilt and fear, right? Fear to take action because it may be a bad decision. We may put our loved one in harm's way or make a poor decision that may make things worse. Or they have guilt for something they did or didn't do. And so those are very powerful emotions, legitimate emotions, yet they're also paralyzing when they're chronic and long and pervasive. And so, but you see a lot of families there who feel hopeless and helpless and don't know what to do. And that's where I come in and let them know that for the people who are suffering and the families who are struggling is there's hope. There's still things you can do. And I've seen it countless times in the work that I do. I've worked with some really down and out cases of people who attempted suicide 48 hours prior to coming to treatment.
Wow.
Or people with chronic years or decades of severe substance abuse with heroin, opiates, alcohol, or people who've endured significant traumas in their life, childhood traumas, and they're able to recover and reset and restart and live productive lives.
So this might be a little triggering. So I'm a little biased. So I wanted to get your feedback on this because I really wanted to find out your perspective. Like, why is there such an epidemic of mental health bullshit, I call it? And why I'm saying it that way is because my belief is we have a lot of folks in this new generation who have been taught to, how should I say this, is to have great self-esteem, but have zero self-respect for themselves. And there's no identity of self-respect. And so the rabbit hole of hurting themselves or trying to hurt others because they don't have any, boundaries for themselves. Like, I'm curious, like, why do you think there's such an epidemic going on and you're seeing more and more cases pop up? Oh, there's no volume. Try again.
No.
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 There you go. There you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know why
You're good.
that.
You're there.
It's okay.
You're good.
It might just be a connection thing.
You're good.
So,
oh, we lost you again.
It's okay.
It's all good. There you go.
There you go.
See, I told you to get triggered.
Man, Instagram Live is it's testing my threshold.
You're good.
So yeah. Okay, let's try this one. So
You're good. You're good. We can hear you.
Can't hear me.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
I just look at the phone and it turns on.
We can hear you. You're good.
So I think back to your question of why is at least we're seeing a rise in people with wanting self-esteem but not self-respect. Correct?
No, my question is why is there such an epidemic? Why are you such valuable use right now? Like, there's just there's a lot of mental health stuff going on, and I'm just curious, like, why do you think there's such an epidemic going on of people wanting to hurt themselves or hurt others?
Okay. Well, that's a great question, and I believe there's a variety of factors going on. And one thing that I always like to tell people is sometimes we go to an extreme, right? For example, social media has been a positive thing in many ways, right? In many ways, the facilitation of knowledge, the accessibility of knowledge, to be able to connect with people in social settings and gaming and so forth. But just like anything else, along comes challenges. And I do believe is that we are seeing a lot of the ability and accessibility of information that can be harmful, right? Is, for example, Facebook is a wonderful way of connecting with people from past or making new friends and connections. But they did research some years ago that people's mood before they logged on diminished, meaning that they were having a lower mood of sadness after logging off. Because what's happening, I think, with social media is we've created this huge social comparison. You know, Facebook, for example, there's nothing wrong against Facebook. I'm just referring to as some type of social media. Is it just lends itself to this, sometimes this false sense of what's really going on. And so, for example, people will post things like vacations and promotions and so forth. And of course, that's what they're going to do. But the person on the other end is getting this false sense of self of things that they don't have. And so it reflects upon, wow, life is so much better than what I don't have. And so it's also this comparison sometimes of what success is supposed to look like, what happiness is going to look like. And so I think there's one issue going on. And I think extreme social comparison can lead people to have lower self-worth, and they forget about the things they have and their strengths, and they're focused a lot on what the things they don't have and their deficiencies. I also believe, at least I can speak to our culture in the United States, is, I don't know if you know this, but over 70% of the world's opiates are painkillers.
Yeah.
And that's including heroin. 70% or more of the world's opiate use are accounted for by the United States. Okay, and that could be for various reasons, whether it be accessibility and so forth. And so I believe what's happened also is our threshold for dealing with certain things like discomfort and anxiety has greatly diminished, is because there's a quick fix. You know, we feel uncomfortable. I do believe culturally, I see a lot with clients, is that we've stigmatized things like anxiety, right? That it's bad, get rid of it, don't have it, right? And actually, research shows that mild to moderate levels of anxiety, there's a survival mechanism tied to that. That's what makes you ensure that you have enough battery life and water when you're going hiking in the Mojave Desert. That's what makes you make sure your oxygen tanks are filled and your equipment when you're going deep sea diving, right? And so that's what makes you turn around slowly 100 yards away when you see a black bear, right, looking at you, right? And so anxiety, mild to moderate levels, is actually critically important for survival. I think that we've created, at least on some levels, we send these messages out there that anxiety is bad and get rid of it at all costs, and we have these quick fixes. So I would say right off the top of my head, that's a great question. I think social comparison ad nauseum, when it's exposed to our constantly on social media, and I believe a stigma of mental health, as well as certain aspects of our life that are important, such as anxieties and anger and sadness, right? And I think we also have this stigmatization of having suicidal thoughts, is don't talk about it. And so there's still, I think the United States has come a huge way in terms of slowly destigmatizing mental health, but we still have a long ways to go as well.
I'm going to follow up real quick on that. So thank you for saying that, because I really wanted to hear your perspective, and a lot of what you say I agree with. And this is where I come from. I told you I was an addict. I was an alcoholic, right? I had this background. And so I'm a little insensitive at times because I knew what I had to do to overcome. And what my original question was, I believe that the family structure has really hurt individuals because, again, we're focusing on this endorphin. How can we make you feel better? You know, everybody's focused on self-esteem, as opposed to self-respect. They're looking for endorphins in the wrong places. They're looking for social media. You know, I have a friend of mine who her daughter was ill with something, and the first thing they want to do is put her on medication. Everybody wants to just medicate, as opposed to using the signs of depressed state, of anxiety, of these triggers that are inside us that are notifying us that we need to do something different. These notifications are God's way of sharing that, look, something is off, like ding, 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 like the spidey senses. Those spidey senses are there to tell us that what we're doing isn't working and what we're doing has to change. Yet most people are just covering it up with alcohol, porn, right? Addictions, gambling, and they're trying to find this source. And what they're doing, what I've seen, because I went through it, is they're just masking the pain of not dealing with their own personal stress. And so I'm really glad you said that, because for me, what I had to do is when you don't know my story, but 5 years ago, when I hit rock bottom, I was face to face with a man that I didn't like. I didn't like the guy. And you don't know this, but Albert, my kids didn't talk to me for a couple of years. I, as a 47-year-old man, had to make a decision. Do I want to keep living this way and eventually kill my own self because of the pattern I was going? Or what did I need to do for myself to make myself feel better? This is where the personal responsibility comes from, and the accountability and the self-respect. What do I need to do instead of self-medicate? How can I self-love, and how can I create self-mastery? How can I create self-confidence for myself? I took the responsibility, and I think that's what's lacking in a lot of these institutions, or the verbiage is lack of personal responsibility, and let's just put a Band-Aid over it.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh. So, hey, by the way, I want to just recognize and appreciate your honesty and the great work that you're doing in your own recovery, right? And so for your listeners out there who may be struggling, it's never too late to reset your life. I believe we are given the gift to reset. I've seen people, grandparents, that come to treatment and they're able to get healthy. And we are more resilient than you can imagine. I literally had a gentleman who was drinking a bottle of tequila for 40 years straight. He was in his 60s. He was on the list for liver failure. He had all the signs of liver failure, jaundice, distended stomach, and so forth. And he was on the list, and obviously, as you know, you're not high priority when it's a substance use disorder, alcohol. And literally after 3 weeks of eating better and sleeping better, his liver functioning started to recuperate.
Wow.
Before you know it, he was no longer in need of a liver transplant.
Good.
So that's just the power and the resilient. We wouldn't be here for 100,000 years or more if we weren't resilient physically and mentally. So I just want to recognize, and there is a true concept of neuroplasticity. For your listeners who aren't aware, it's our brain's ability to heal. It's our ability to create new memories and create new connections until the moment we die. And so for your listeners out there to really have hope. So I want to recognize that. One thing also I want to say is, and this is one of the must-knows that I write about, because people wonder, like, well, why do I use alcohol and heroin when I know it's so bad for me, or painkillers or THC? And you're absolutely correct. A lot of times it is just a sophisticated means of coping with some type of distress in their life. And a lot of times that distress could be a trauma or something they're trying to quiet down. But one of the 3 words that I say, and a must know, is the reason why people use substances simply is because it works, right? It works for what it was originally intended to, whether it be quiet the thoughts, to numb my pain. But over time, as you become more tolerant, it becomes dysfunctional and counterproductive. And what happens when people rely on a substance, for instance, it becomes their life preserver. And I call it a dysfunctional life preserver, meaning it's that it'll keep you afloat for a little, but sooner or later it's going to sink you the more you rely on it. And what happens is when we rely on one thing, like a substance, we forget about any other tools in our belt: mindfulness techniques, therapy, exercise, healthy diet, community, fellowship. And so we become one-on-one with our disease and that substance. And so, but yes, absolutely, people are resorting to that. There's a lot of natural things out there. Pharmacies weren't around hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we're finding there's a lot of natural elements out there, right? Magnesium, fish oils, ashwagandha. There's so many natural, lavender, that are helping mitigate some of these mental health symptoms. And so you're right. I do believe there is an issue of over-medicating as a first-line defense, and there's things that you can do. Meditation, mindfulness techniques can be just as effective in many ways of mitigating some of these anxiety, depressive symptoms. And so I'm glad you're on board with that. And just for your listeners out there, know that there are other options out there. Seek them. And when you need that extra help and medicine is an option to help lessen those symptoms, then to explore that. But there's a lot of stuff that we're discovering out there that we could get back to help us manage our mental health issues.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot about guilt and shame. I think that's a good segue. I've dove through a lot of guilt and shame of my own personal endeavors, because whether it's like through the use of pornography, I've used alcohol as well too. Being in college, it's surrounded like there. Not saying I had like a big problem, but it was enough to notice to where when I used it, I was noticing I was abusing it enough that I was not living the life that I wanted to live, right? So in your practice and what you see, not only as a professional, but as a specialist in your field, when you talk to families with guilt and shame, there's a lot of complexities in it, because there's a lot of woven potential secrets. There's a lot of woven cultural differences between each family. So when you talk to them about guilt and shame mixed with your own personal values, as an observer, how do you go about like bringing the guilt up into the light, and how do you talk with them about it when this could be so down below their surface? How do you extract that in a healthy way?
Yeah. Well, let me back up a little bit. And when I conceptualize the disease, one thing that's important to know is that there's no unifying definition of disease. In the American Medical Society and the American Psychological Association, there is not one unifying definition of a disease. But we know, right, a disease in general, you can have a medical disease, hypertension, diabetes, a psychiatric disease, which is like a substance use disorder, depression, anxiety. But also a disease to me is any entity in life that has been long-lasting that causes impairment in your life. And so in that case, we all have some version of a disease, right? I talk about things like selfishness. That causes problems in your life. That's your version of a disease. Materialism, right? Focusing on material items, money and material things. That's your version of disease. Hedonism, the seeking of pleasure. So we all have a version of disease, and we're all in some form of recovery, which is a healthier place for living, healthier living. But the reason why I mention that is because I like to personify our disease. It doesn't define anyone. A substance use disorder, a medical condition, a psychiatric condition, it doesn't define anyone. But I like to personify it as a separate entity. And I believe this entity, when personified, meaning we give it human-like qualities, I believe its oil and gas, is guilt and fear. And so what is guilt? Guilt is sort of like this regret of having done or not done something. And it is one of the most powerful barriers for families taking action against their loved ones. For example, maybe early on in their years, maybe a parent wasn't a severe alcoholic and wasn't present in one's life. Maybe there was a divorce early on and they divorced early and they regret they weren't present in their children's lives. Maybe there was abuse in the family because someone who was brought in the home. And so guilt is very powerful. It's a legitimate emotion. But like I said, it becomes a huge barrier. And so one way I battle with families with guilt is when I work with families and that are still invested, 99% of the time, those families never meant intentional harm, right? And then maybe they I said 99% didn't mean intentional harm. The 1% maybe were having an untreated mental health condition or some other explanation, but they meant. And so that's the reason why I say that, because it's critically important to release yourself from self-guilt, right? It's because, especially if you didn't mean any harm, and one way of helping battle guilt is through the amends process, right? What does the amends process mean? It means to repair. So if you were an alcoholic during your children's early years and you weren't present, what's your amends to repair? Stay sober and be present in your children's lives, right? If you were not a great communicator and you weren't educated in mental health and that caused problems in your relationship with someone, your amends means to be a better listener, be more attentive, and get yourself on mental health. And so that's one of the things I work with families. I literally had a family who had only one child, and at about 14 years of age, she was expressing to her parents this interest in marijuana. So the parents who grew up in the era of about the 70s smoked marijuana. So what did they do? They decided, well, we want to teach her the proper way to smoke marijuana. So they smoked out with her. What happened? She became addicted to marijuana, alcohol, and other substances. And when they came into treatment, they harbored a great deal of guilt. They said, Dr. Licuanan, we're the reasons why she became an addict. I said, did you mean for her to become an addict? No. Was smoking out with your daughter a wise decision? Probably not. And so you have to release yourself from guilt by making amends and by being present and educated and so forth. And so, and that was a great question, Albert, and I hope I somewhat answered, but I'm really glad you brought up guilt because it is a very powerful and disempowering emotion, a legitimate emotion, but when it stays lingering there, it can be one of the big reasons of families not making decisions or getting their loved one to the help that they need.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about this because as you brought up divorce, like a couple of things I think the viewers need to understand. Like we have these emotions and they're frequencies, and I think people don't really understand that. Shame, guilt, fear, anger, desire. Those are all frequencies, and if we're constantly living in those frequencies, you can't fix the problem when you're in the problem. And the idea is if you want to get to joy, happiness, and enlightenment, those are higher frequencies. You have to literally change your body, change something about yourself in order to get those frequencies. For me, one of the things that I had to go through for years, and this is part of the sobriety and part of the I wrote a book called From Darkness to Redemption. The redemption part really wasn't about getting my family back. It was about dealing with the decisions that I made that caused harm to my family and decimated that relationship. And I harbored that for years, and I still do at times. But one of the biggest key factors, I think that a lot of listeners need to hear this, is in order for you to get through these guilt, shame, apathy, these lower frequencies, you have to be completely honest with yourself. And that, I call it, it's not your truth, it's the truth. If you're truthful with, again, like you said, was this intentional? No. But the truth will set you free. It's these stories that we make up along the way that make this frequency harbor so low that we just dwell in the shit. Yeah. And so it's really important that we do really have the medicine within to fix ourselves. And it's great you have like yourself out there and these agencies that help. However, I also think it's a crutch at times. I know what you don't know, you don't know. I understand that. But at times we're looking for answers in all the wrong places. Yeah. When we can deal with what did I do, how did I show up, and how do I affect it? And then the most important part is making amends. One of the biggest things that I had to do is literally, you see my son here, right? He's asking great questions. He's being honest with himself. We wouldn't be here if his dad wasn't honest with him. He wouldn't be admitting things if his dad wasn't honest with him. Not just me, but his mom as well. So it's important that we make amends by if we really feel this guilt and shame, whatever, is have the ownership of it, of like taking accountability of this is what I did and this is what I meant and I'm sorry I hurt you, but also not continually living in stories. So I'm curious with what you're at in your profession, I'm curious when you come home, how are you able to detach from these stories that you hear and see and live a healthy, prosperous family at home? I'm curious about how that dynamic happens.
I get asked that question a lot as well, and I don't know, but for some reason, I'm able to turn it off. Yeah. Because that's one of the challenging with any field, whether it be law enforcement, fire department, an ICU nurse or doctor or what have you, is we can fall into that, where we get overly enmeshed or emotionally attached, where it becomes consuming and detrimental in our clinical work. But for some reason, I don't know why, I am able to turn it off. And I think that's just something innate, unless I'm missing something of why I am. I can yet be empathic, right? But I'm able to turn it off. And I don't know if having worked with those adolescents early on helped me to navigate through something like that. But I still can't explain as to why I'm able to do that. And I don't know if it's a combination of things I'm doing in my life, whether it be physical, surrounding myself with healthy, supportive people, a fellowship. But I'm still searching for that answer as well. And sometimes people can do it, and some people have a difficult time doing it. And so, but yet I'm still able to be empathic and connected with people. And so, great question. That's an exploration. If I can talk about one thing that you are mentioning, is you're talking about different energies, which is critically important. And generally speaking, different chakras of energies, and two basic ones where people differentiate between people who progress or be healthier side than versus people who don't. But fear is one of those lower level energies that are also involved of like blame and anger, resentments. But lower frequency energies of anger, resentment, and blame are where you see people stay unhealthy.
Yep.
And higher frequency energies are surrounded with love. Those are optimism, hope, care, empathy. And one way of battling those energies is changing, revising the way we think. And you talk about the stories and the narrative. That is the single most important attribute and element that differentiates people who progress in life and who don't. It's how they think. Do you basically see the half glass full or half glass empty? Are you searching for solutions, or are you marinating in problems? Are you looking for hope, or are you focused on despair?
Yeah.
Right? And are you a I can't person, it's impossible, or are you a, you know what, I'm not giving up, I'm going to try whatever I can to make it work? And that is the single most attribute that I believe differentiates people who are able to succeed and progress in life and not, is what they do with that data and information that enters their mind, and how they structure that information in terms of what output comes out. And so literally, I'm glad you bring up energies, is because marinating in resentment and anger and blame, I call resentments, which is unresolved anger, I call it the termites of our inner being, or the acid of our souls. And if you think about it, resentments are at the height of any religion, and in the AA world, any type of therapy. A big focus is on working through and letting go of resentments.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So when you, I guess what we're kind of alluding to too, with that good question, Dad, was when you bring these energies into, like, going from the psychologist version of you with the parent version of yourself. I'm curious, as like a son, and this is kind of segueing into the next portion, is how do you make sure that you show up for your family when you have such a big responsibility with all your clients, but making sure that you also have and be dad as well?
Mm-hmm. One thing that I make sure that I do is to make sure I take care of my own needs, is because if I'm not taking care of myself, it's very difficult to be able to be my best self as a father, as a parent, a spouse, a friend, as a clinician. And so that's, I believe, at the very, very core, right? Is because if you're not working on your best self, it's very hard to be of service to others and everything else.
And what does that look like in your life?
To me,
Yes.
it's definitely, I believe, by the way, there's 5 areas of one's life that dictates the quality of life and healthiness. And that's the physical self. That's your body. What you do with your body. What do you put into your body? There's the mental and emotional, how we think, how we manage our emotions, how we self-regulate our emotions. There's the social. Social are relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, extracurricular activities. Then there's the career, what you do in your career. And then there's spiritual. For some people, it's a higher power, but it can also mean a deeper purpose and value, or a deeper sense of spirit. I believe all those areas account for 20% each of our healthy well-being. And if you neglect one or more of those, you're living an imbalanced life, right? If you're focused all in your body, but you neglect your spirit, not unhealthy. If you focus all in your career, but neglect your mental, emotional, you're imbalanced. And so that's one thing that I try to do is I try to make sure that I'm attending and realizing they all count 20% in my life, and I have to work near 100% on every single one of those. And so some activities that I do, of course, I like to work out, right? I like to go on dates with my wife still on the relationship. I like to plan activities with my kids. I'm a spiritual person. I make sure I keep God first and foremost. And I also am very passionate and competitive in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which has been a life and game changer for me.
Yeah, I love it. The family part, we'll segue in that a little bit. So through your journey and the adventures and experiences you've had, because you're meeting other families and you see the chaos out there, how's that made you a better father?
Appreciation, right? Gratitudes are critically important. Waking up and having a gratitude every day and recognizing what we have and not focus on what we don't have.
Yeah.
That's important. You wake up literally. Denzel Washington gave a commencement speech and he said to a graduating class, he said, put your slippers deep under your bed so when you wake up in the morning, you have to get on your knees. And so he says, wake up with a gratitude every day. And that's one thing that I do. And the work that I do is it reminds me, it's a constant reminder of the little things matter, that how I role model to others and my kids can have lifelong impact. The things I say, the way I behave, and sometimes not the things that I say, it's the things that I don't say that communicate. How do I interact with the waiter when my kids can have an impact, plant a seed. How I navigate through problems and issues, how I communicate with my partner, my spouse. That's what keeps me going, is to always try my best, not perfect, but try to be my best self each day. And each day, how do I be a slightly better self than I was previously?
So real quick on that. So I want to talk to my son for a minute. So isn't it interesting, Albert? You meet another man, they kind of talks like me.
Yeah. I was going to say that too.
And I just appreciate what you said, Brian, because what's interesting is I have so much respect for you. We come from two different lives. I've just learned what you're talking about 5 years ago. Like literally, like the life that I live in this disciplined, rigid, compassionate life now, I had to learn it on my own because the life I was living was not giving me the life that I wanted. So I had to make these massive changes. And so it's empowering that you're really reflecting the ideologies that this man in front of you is also experiencing as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. It's very validating as well.
I think that's what I'm looking forward to the most is what you just said. Like, you get to show up every day and you get to show your son, you get to show your spouse, your wife, like what it is to be a man, what it is to show up in integrity and be the person that you want to be, and I feel like that's the greatest gift that we can give to other people too, is like, just be Brian, be Albert, Albert, my dad, right? And those are the reasons why our loved ones love us, right? Is because we show up the way that we do. And I think part of your work is also teaching people and teaching families how to coexist and live up to their potentials within those own little individual seculars that we're talking about here today. So I have one more question, just as we kind of wrap up here. I know it's getting towards the end. I know you and your son do a lot of jiu-jitsu and do a lot of bonding activities, but if you could kind of summarize in one statement, what is the best thing to you about being a father?
The ability to have impact. That is, like I said, I'm a middle-aged man, and I feel like I'm getting a reset in my life. I feel like I'm just somewhat, in many ways, starting my life because of what I'm focusing on now. And one of my biggest mantras for myself is be an impact person. Be an impact. And I believe my impact is on many levels in my career is to spread mental health awareness. And so that's what I try to focus on is how can I be impactful to others and especially to the people around me. And one way of doing that is living an authentic life. And so, like for my son, for example, it's not so much holding, being always at this strong self. No, it's showing him my vulnerabilities, but also showing him how I navigate through things. Like, for example, he comes to my competitions a lot. He literally coaches me, and he's my timekeeper and so forth. And he's seen me lose. And it's, to me, that's the best learning lesson for him is to show him how I navigate through it, is how I think through it, and how I develop myself for the next time. That this is an opportunity to grow and learn from and not a deficiency on my part. And I think that's a very powerful lesson that I try to do is to focus how can I have the most positive and life-changing impact on people who I want to impact.
Beautiful. We're about 7-8 minutes here. So we like to ask this question toward the end. Since coming on our show, we really appreciate it. Is there a question that you had for Albert and I about us or something you've been thinking about? If not, no worries, but we always like to ask the question because sometimes there's some curiosity.
What is your impact? What is, as I talk about impact, what do you think going into maybe the new year? What is going to be your revised impact that you want to have?
So that's what we're working on. I'm going home on Friday. We're going to be actually talking about it. We haven't genuinely discussed it, but as just some thinking out loud, for me, I just want to give more to the community. What that means is show more vulnerability this year. I think we've done 46, 47 episodes in this year, and we just started it this year. And from episode 1 to episode 12, we did a little recap of what we grew. And for us, that was like, okay, we were just getting the logistics down. And then from like 12 to 24, we were like, okay, well, we want to like bring on new guests and bring new explorations and show different people. And so we just have the biggest thing that me and my dad have learned is not only how to like be father and son, but how to also like elevate each other this year, because we got to learn so much. I heard stories about my dad that I knew and not some that I didn't know. And in those stories, I learned how he showed up and how he didn't show up. And that was the key is like, oh, okay, like he's giving me more value in the small stories of like how he messed up. But now he trusts me to carry on with that information and to show more wisdom of like how he messed up and how I can show up at my age for my future spouse and for myself as a young entrepreneur. So I think for us, it's going to be how do we storytell? How do we get better at that? And bring on new guests like yourself. And if you would like to come back on, that could be also another thing too. And how do we elevate them to be more open and share their stories? Because it's hard to come on live and be real and authentic. Sometimes it's easy to just go to our scripts that we have and say, oh, this is what I'm good at, so I want to present that to the world. So we also like to work with that as well too. Is how do we make people feel comfortable enough, not only here, but in our actual lives? Right. So that's going to be my impact. We'll discuss how we can both promote that in a couple weeks.
For me, I have two answers. There's one for me and then one for our show. I've been very vulnerable about this. It's taken me a lot to get where I'm at today. And I had to completely deconstruct these belief systems and habits. 2025 is just to continue staying in character, continually being as better version as I can every day. And in that, the wake of that is to influence my son. Like you could see already, Brian, the power. Like my son's 26 years old, but he's a man asking great questions, and we're talking about topics that most men and fathers and sons will never talk about. And so to be able to just have that impact even more, I can't wait to have more guests like you on. We've had a tremendous year, but I get to see now the impact it's having on him. I would love to have my other two daughters on. I would love to have his mom on. She may never come on, but that's my vision of just the impact of the family that we're recreating based upon the narrative of where we're going. And I think more conversations with families and fathers and sons and mothers and daughters need to be talked. And I think that is the key to what your whole topic is, mental health, is to talk about these taboos that nobody fucking talks about. They're all secrets. Everybody's hiding secrets and stories because of their ego and what they don't want to get people's feelings hurt or talk mess about this. No, bring it out so the new generation knows what you dealt with and they have a blueprint of what not to do. I want to do more of that. There's still stories my son doesn't know about me and him and me about him. So the impact we want to make is to have conversations like this. And you can see I get passionate about it because I am. Like, this is some serious stuff we're talking about. And imagine more families and fathers and sons like yourself and daughters can hear these stories like yourself and my son of like, look, we're all human beings. We all have these weird habits. We all have these things we're going through. Let's talk about them so we can learn how to overcome what you overcame so there's less quote unquote suffering and hurt, and we can help manage people. So that's what I want to see more of is guests like you and elevating what we're doing.
Great impact, great visions.
So I want to say thank you so much for hopping on. It was a blessing to get to know more, hear about what you really do and how you have not only just changed like your personal life, but others and your family too. Because I think that's really impactful. Sometimes it's easy to just be good in one area of your life, but you really talked about the 5 pillars that are really important to you and how to be a complete person. So for me and my dad, I'm just want to say thank you for just taking the leap of faith. And I know this is new to you on Instagram Live, so maybe you'll start doing more. I'm not sure. But thank you for at least coming on and just showing up. I know it's the holiday season and you got a family, so it just means a lot to me and my dad. So with that, thank you everyone for another great episode. This is going to be the last one of the year, so we'll see you in 2025. And I hope you guys have a good holiday season. Thank you so much. And we're wrapping up here at the Legacy Project Season 1.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.